When Mira told her parents she was marrying a plumber, her mother nearly dropped the phone. A plumber? How embarrassing, she hissed before hanging up. Her father didn't say a word. He simply ended the call. Her sister laughed so loud it echoed through the receiver. Who'd be caught dead at that wedding, they mocked. They didn't just disapprove, they completely boycotted her wedding. No messages, no calls, not even a token gift. So on the morning she walked down the aisle, there was no proud father waiting to give her away, no mother wiping tears of joy, just silence where love should have been. Before we continue, please subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from so you don't miss out on our next story. But what her family didn't know was that the man they called a plumber wasn't merely fixing pipes. Leo was a former MIT engineer, one of those rare minds that saw systems in patterns others missed. He had left the corporate world to build something of his own, something meaningful. Just a few weeks after the wedding, his face, and Myra's, appeared on national television. The phone that once rang with ridicule now rang with regret. 110 missed calls, all from the people who said she had shamed them. They were begging for her time now. Life has a way of turning mockery into applause. If you've ever been judged for who you love or shamed by the very people who should have protected you, stay close, because by the end of the story, you'll see how one act of courage can turn silence into power and disgrace into dignity. This isn't just a love story. It's a quiet kind of revenge, the kind that doesn't yell, it rises. Myra's story began long before that phone call, long before the wedding boycott, in the quiet apartment of a woman who had grown tired of pretending to belong. At 32, Mira lived a calm, structured life. She worked as a senior financial advisor at a small but respected firm in Boston. Her apartment in Cambridge was modest but spotless, paid off entirely from her own hard work. To anyone looking from the outside, she was success in quiet form, steady, composed, and self-sufficient. But inside, she carried the invisible weight of a daughter who could never please her family. Her parents, the Prestons, were symbols of old wealth and reputation. To them, appearance was not just important, it was everything. Her mother, Eleanor Preston, hosted charity luncheons where every guest was photographed for society pages. Her father, Charles, managed an empire of real estate and ego. And then there was Clara, her younger sister, the darling of the family, adored and admired, a woman who made attention look effortless. Mira had spent her life being the sensible one, praised for her practicality, but never celebrated for her heart. Still, she tried, she showed up, dressed right, smiled right. But deep down, she always knew she didn't fit their mold. When Mira finally decided to call her parents to tell them about the wedding, her hands shook, not from fear, but from something older. Years of trying to earn affection had taught her exactly what rejection sounded like. The phone rang 3 times before her mother picked up. "Mira," Eleanor said, her voice distant, as though answering a stranger. "Hi, Mom," Mira began softly. "I just wanted to tell you, the wedding's next Saturday. I'd love for you and Dad to be there." There was silence. Not the kind that comes from surprise, but from quiet judgment. "Next Saturday," Eleanor repeated, like the date itself was offensive. "Yes," Mira said, more firmly now. "At Lakeside Gardens. It'll be small, just a few friends and family." The air on the line grew sharp. "You're really going through with this? With him?" Eleanor asked, spitting out the word him, like it was something dirty. "Yes, Mom," Mira said, steady but soft. "With Leo." The sound that followed wasn't quite laughter. It was something colder. "Mira marrying a plumber," her mother scoffed. "Do you expect us to stand there and pretend you haven't dragged our family name through the mud?" Mira closed her eyes. "Leo is a good man. He's kind, smart, and he treats me with respect." "I'm sure he fixes pipes beautifully," Eleanor shot back. The words hit like small stones, familiar but still painful. Before Mira could reply, she heard her sister's voice in the background. "Oh my God," Clara said with a sneer. "Who'd be caught dead at that wedding?" There was muffled laughter, then her father's voice, distant, indifferent. "Who is it?" Eleanor answered coolly. "Your daughter. Inviting us to her plumber wedding." Silence. No defense, no curiosity. Just silence. Mira hung up, and for the first time, she didn't cry. She simply sat still, letting the truth settle like dust after a storm. That night, as Mira finalized her wedding guest list with her best friend, Lena, she quietly removed 3 names: Eleanor Preston, Charles Preston, and Clara Preston. She stared at the empty spaces where their names had been, her pen hovering as though waiting for something that would never come. She didn't erase them out of anger, but out of peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop begging people to love you. The day of the wedding arrived bathed in golden morning light. The small garden glimmered with white chairs and wildflowers that brushed softly in the breeze. There was music, laughter, and warmth, but 3 seats in the front row stayed empty. Mira stood behind the pavilion door, her ivory gown simple, elegant, and free of spectacle. Her reflection in the glass didn't show sadness. It showed strength. She walked down the aisle alone. No father's arm, no mother's tearful smile, just her, walking into her new life with courage stitched into every step. In that moment, Mira realized something powerful. All her life, she had been taught that love must be earned, that worth must be proven. But here she was, building something from truth, not titles. The absence of her family no longer broke her. It freed her. As she exchanged vows with Leo under a canopy of trees and sunlight, she understood that love without approval is still love, and dignity without applause is still victory. For years, Mira had lived in the shadow of the Prestons' legacy. Their home, a mansion on the green hills of Connecticut, stood as a monument to perfection. Her parents had crafted their image like fine art. Every dinner party, every photograph, every conversation rehearsed to maintain status. To them, reputation was not a reflection of who they were, but a costume they wore to stay admired. Mira had grown up rehearsing smiles and memorizing etiquette, believing that maybe one day she would finally fit in. Her sister Clara, 2 years younger, had been their masterpiece. Charming, stylish, always surrounded by admirers, Clara moved through life as though it owed her the spotlight. When Mira graduated top of her class, her parents barely attended. When Clara hosted a brunch, photographers came. When Mira bought her first apartment, they sent polite congratulations. When Clara posted a new outfit, her mother gushed. The contrast was endless, but by 30, Mira had stopped fighting for space in a story that wasn't written for her. It wasn't that she didn't love her family. She did. But love without respect is a slow suffocation. She had learned to smile at dinners where her achievements were footnotes and her opinions were background noise. "You should be more like your sister," her mother often said, smiling in that way that looked kind but cut deep. Mira had tried for years to be more like her sister, until one day she realized she'd rather just be herself, even if no one applauded. By the time she met Leo, she had already begun to unlearn everything she'd been taught about value. It happened one morning when her apartment pipes burst, flooding her bathroom floor. She called an emergency service. 47 minutes later, a man in worn work boots and a navy shirt appeared at her door. "Leo Hart," he said, nodding with a warm smile. "Heard you've got yourself a mini waterfall." Mira laughed despite herself, leading him inside. He moved with quiet confidence, fixing the problem without fuss or frustration. When he finished, he washed his hands and said, "You're all set. But you might want to get these old pipes checked. They've seen better days." "You sound like a doctor," Mira teased. He grinned. "Plumbing's just surgery for houses." They both laughed. Then, before she could overthink it, she asked, "Would you like some coffee?" He hesitated, surprised, then nodded. That was how it began. A simple cup of coffee shared over small talk that turned into hours of conversation about books, life, and the strange comfort of doing things your own way. Leo spoke about his work like it was art. "Plumbing's about trust," he said once. "Everything flows right when every connection is honest." The words stayed with her. He was gentle but strong, funny without trying, and thoughtful in a way that didn't need showing off. Soon, their chats turned into weekend walks, shared dinners, and laughter that filled her apartment like sunlight. For the first time, Mira felt seen, not as a daughter of the Prestons, but as herself. For months, Mira kept her family a quiet secret. She told Leo her parents lived in Connecticut but left out the details, the mansion, the wealth, the obsession with reputation. She wanted him to know her, not her background. It wasn't shame, it was protection. Leo often joked about rich kids in suits who looked down on tradesmen. Mira didn't want him to think she was one of them. Yet as their love deepened, she knew she couldn't hide forever. One evening, while they were cooking dinner together, Leo said softly, "When do I get to meet the people who raised this wonderful chaos?" His tone was playful, but his eyes sincere. Mira froze for a second, stirring the pasta sauce too long. "Soon," she said, smiling weakly. "They're complicated." Leo shrugged gently. "So are leaky faucets. You fix them one valve at a time." His words made her laugh, but the thought of introducing him to her parents filled her with dread. A week later, she made the call. "Mother," she began carefully, "I'd like you to meet someone. Sunday dinner, maybe?" Eleanor's voice was smooth but curious. "Oh, and who might this someone be?" Mira replied, "His name is Leo. He runs his own business, a plumbing service." There was a long silence, then a polite hum. "Lovely," Eleanor said, her tone tightening. "We'll see you both at 6. Mira hung up knowing it wasn't approval, it was preparation. The Preston estate was exactly as Mira remembered. Immaculate gardens, tall gates, and a silence so rehearsed it felt heavy. Leo wore his best blazer, shoes polished, hands steady. But Mira could feel his unease as they climbed the marble steps. "Whatever happens in there," she whispered, "you're not alone." He smiled faintly. "I know." When the door opened, Eleanor stood there in pearls and posture. "You must be Leo," she said, extending a hand like it was a formality. "We don't often entertain guests from hands-on professions." "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Preston," Leo said warmly. Her father, Charles, stood a few steps back, arms crossed, silent. The dining room was a masterpiece of polished oak and unspoken judgment. Clara arrived last, perfume filling the room before her voice did. Well, she said with a smirk, Myra's found herself a fixer. Her laughter rang like glass. "So, Leo, tell me, what's it like spending your days elbow-deep in sinks?" Leo smiled calmly. "It's honest work. I make broken things work again." "That must be fun when people flush the wrong things," Clara teased. "I can barely change a light bulb." "Then I guess we balance each other out," Leo said gently, and for a moment, the air cracked with silent admiration. But dinner was no kinder. Charles talked about stocks. Eleanor bragged about charity events. Clara showed off her new designer bag. No one asked Leo a real question. When Eleanor finally did, it came laced with poison. "So, Leo, in your field, do you get retirement benefits or just work until your knees give out?" Leo set his fork down, meeting her eyes. "I plan ahead. I've structured my business to run without me someday. I believe in long-term systems." Eleanor blinked. "How pragmatic of you." The conversation drifted back to money, prestige, and everything Mira once thought mattered. By dessert, her throat ached from silence. Leo never lost his calm. He smiled at her under the table, squeezed her hand, and whispered, "They don't see me, but I see you." Those 6 words were enough to keep her from breaking. Outside, under the cold night air, Mira finally exhaled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "They were awful." Leo shook his head softly. "They don't have to understand me, Mira. They don't even have to like me." She looked at him, eyes wet. "But it's not fair." He smiled faintly. "They don't need to believe in what I do. You do. And that's enough." In that moment, something shifted inside her. The realization that love built on respect was stronger than approval built on image. As they drove away from the Preston mansion, Mira watched the lights fade behind them. Those walls that once defined success now looked like a cage. Beside her sat a man who fixed things not for status but for peace. The man her parents mocked was richer than anyone she'd ever known, not in possessions, but in spirit. One day, Leo said quietly, his hand resting on hers. They'll see. Mira smiled through tired eyes. I don't need them to. I already do. The days that followed were quiet, but not heavy. Mira found herself watching Leo in small moments, how he fixed things without complaint, how he listened instead of waiting to speak, how he treated people without measuring their worth. Love, she realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was built in silence and small gestures. So when he asked her to meet him one golden afternoon at the park, she didn't suspect anything unusual. The leaves were turning copper, and the air smelled faintly of pine. They walked down a narrow path until they reached a clearing where an old bench stood under an oak tree. Leo turned to her, a soft, nervous smile on his lips. Mira, he said, reaching into his pocket, you're the calm I didn't know I needed. Will you marry me? There was no photographer, no ring of diamonds, no grand speech, just truth. She said yes through tears, her voice trembling with joy. It wasn't the proposal she grew up dreaming of, but it was everything her heart had waited for. That night, still wearing her modest opal ring, Mira called her parents. She didn't want permission, she wanted honesty. Mother, she said when Eleanor picked up, Leo proposed. There was a pause long enough for the distance between them to widen. Well, Eleanor replied finally, her tone clipped, I suppose congratulations are in order. Good luck to you and your plumber. But don't expect us to be part of that circus. Myra's breath caught. It's not a circus, it's my wedding. People will talk, her mother warned. I don't care what people think, Mira said quietly. Well, we do, Eleanor snapped, and ended the call. Mira tried her father next. He didn't answer. Moments later, a message appeared from Clara, a single laughing emoji. That tiny symbol said everything her family ever had, mockery dressed as love. Mira didn't cry that night. Instead, she sat by her window, city lights reflecting in her eyes, and wrote a new guest list, not of those who shared her blood, but of those who shared her kindness. Friends who showed up when no one else did. Neighbors who asked how she was doing. Leo's mother, who sent soup when she had the flu. Those were her people now. The wedding would be small, beautiful, and free. For the first time in her life, she didn't look back. She simply let go. The morning of her wedding came with a soft drizzle that made the garden shimmer like glass. Mira sat in a rented cottage near the venue, sipping tea with Lena, her best friend. Nervous? Lena asked. Not about marrying him, Mira said, smiling. Just about everything else. Together, they set up flowers, lights, and chairs. There were no planners, no staff, just helping hands and real laughter. At the front row sat 3 empty chairs labeled mother, father, and sister. Mira looked at them once, then turned away. Today wasn't for absence. It was for presence. As the music began, a soft violin played by a friend. Mira took a deep breath. But just before she stepped out, a familiar voice called softly from behind. Mira. She turned, heart skipping. Standing there was her Uncle Robert, her father's younger brother, slightly out of breath from travel. I know I wasn't invited, he said, but I couldn't let you walk alone. Myra's throat tightened. You came all this way? I took the first train, he said, smiling kindly. If the offer still stands, I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle. Tears filled her eyes. I'd love that. The crowd rose as she appeared. Each step down that aisle felt lighter, freer. Leo's eyes glowed with quiet awe, not for her gown but for her courage. When she reached him, Uncle Robert placed her hand in Leo's. Take good care of her, he said softly. Leo smiled. With everything I have. The ceremony was simple. Vows whispered through tears, promises spoken from truth, laughter that didn't need approval to be pure. When they kissed, it wasn't the beginning of rebellion. It was the end of pretending. Weeks later, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, Mira found herself cleaning their small study. Leo was out on errands. She opened an old wooden drawer searching for a spare charger, and froze. Inside was a leather folder packed with documents. Her fingers brushed over the first page. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A diploma. Leo Hart, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical and Electrical Engineering. Beneath it were patent approvals, sketches, and email exchanges with major investors. Her pulse raced. Leo, the man the world saw as a plumber, was an MIT engineer, a systems innovator. Her mind swirled. Why hadn't he told her? When Leo returned, rain still on his jacket, he saw the papers spread across the table. "I guess I owe you an explanation," he said quietly. Mira looked up, unsure whether to speak or cry. He sat down, folding his hands. "I worked in defense engineering," he said. 6 years of projects, high pressure, politics, noise. When my father got sick, I came home to help with the plumbing business. Planned to stay 6 months, it's been 4 years. I started a design called Hydrogrid, a smart system that saves water through adaptive flow control. It's what I've been testing after hours. Mira stared, stunned. "You're not just a plumber," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I am a plumber. I just happen to know how water thinks." She laughed through her tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because," he said, "I wanted you to love the man, not the resume." Then he handed her a faded email printout from her mother. The subject line read, "Prospective young men, Clara's list." The message dismissed Leo years ago when someone had suggested him as a suitor for Clara. "MIT is impressive," Eleanor had written, "but he runs a plumbing company now. Not our kind of people." Myra's hands trembled. "They knew you." Leo nodded. "They knew, and they still turned away." The irony hit her like thunder. Her family had rejected the very man who would someday prove them wrong. Months passed, and their little home bloomed with laughter and light. They had no grand honeymoon, no gifts from family, no luxury vacations. What they had was far better: peace. One morning, Leo stood in the kitchen in a dark blue suit instead of his usual work shirt. Mira frowned playfully. "You look too important to fix sinks today." He chuckled. "Today's the Urban Sustainability Summit, remember?" She blinked. "The one in DC?" He nodded, sipping his coffee. "They bumped my panel to the main stage. It's going national." She laughed softly, both proud and in awe. That afternoon, Mira sat on the couch flipping channels until she saw him. Leo stood behind a podium, calm and confident, the screen flashing his name. Leo Hart, founder and CEO of Hydrogrid Systems. Reporters quoted him, "I grew up watching my father fix broken pipes in forgotten homes. I realized our water problem isn't just technical, it's human. Hydrogrid isn't about plumbing, it's about dignity." The audience erupted in applause. Behind him, the slides showed homes in need, families smiling, and statistics of massive water savings. Then came the surprise that changed everything. The host introduced a photo, and behind this innovation stands his wife, Mira Hart. The screen showed her wedding photo, taken beneath fairy lights, no makeup, just joy. The caption read, "Love built on values, not validation." For a few seconds, her face filled millions of screens across the country. Those few seconds were enough to rewrite years of judgment. When the broadcast ended, Myra's phone buzzed like a storm, 110 missed calls, all from the people who once hung up on her. Her mother's voice trembled in a voicemail. "Mira, darling, please call me back. We didn't realize." Her father's message came next. "Sweetheart, let's talk." Even Clara texted, "Okay, maybe I was wrong. Can we meet?" Mira stared at the glowing screen. The same people who laughed at her were now begging for entry into her piece. Leo walked in, loosened his tie, and saw her expression. "They saw it?" he asked softly. She nodded. "All of it." He smiled faintly. "Told you the lighting was good at our wedding." She laughed, but her eyes stayed thoughtful. A week later, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, her parents stood there, elegant as ever, with Clara beside them. William carried a wine basket. Eleanor held a box wrapped in silk. Clara had nothing but her phone and a rehearsed smile. "Mira, darling," Eleanor cooed. "We wanted to congratulate you in person." "What a marvelous achievement." William added, "We're developing a sustainable housing project. Perhaps we can collaborate with Hydrogrid, family synergy, you know." The words dripped with charm and calculation. Mira said nothing, just motioned for them to sit. "Tell me something," Mira said finally, her voice calm. "If Leo were still just a plumber, would you be standing here?" The silence that followed was so thick even the air seemed to pause. Clara gave a nervous laugh. "Don't be dramatic." Leo placed his cup down. "We appreciate the visit," he said softly, "but Hydrogrid isn't for sale, and neither are we." William frowned. "We were trying to make peace." "No," Mira said quietly. "You came to profit." Her father sighed and handed her an envelope. Inside was a legal document asking her to renounce her name from all Preston estates. To preserve brand integrity, the clause read. Mira stared at it, then picked up a pen. Without hesitation, she signed her name at the bottom. "Now," she said, handing it back, "we're truly free." Her parents looked stunned. "You don't even want to think about it?" Eleanor asked. "There's nothing to think about," Mira said. "You disowned me when I wasn't convenient. You came back when I became useful. That's not love, that's leverage." Clara shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Guess this is goodbye then," she muttered. Mira nodded once. "Goodbye." When the door closed behind them, she exhaled deeply. Leo handed her a mug of coffee, his smile warm. "You okay?" She smiled faintly. "For the first time, yes." But the story didn't end there. One night, around 2 a.m., Myra's phone rang again. The name on the screen made her heart sink. Clara. She almost ignored it but answered anyway. Clara's voice was trembling. "Mira, I didn't know who else to call. Parker's been arrested. Fraud. Money laundering. Everything's gone. I have nowhere to go." Mira sat up. "What about Mom and Dad? They said it's too public. That I'd ruin their image." For a long moment Mira said nothing. Then she whispered, "Come stay with us." Clara arrived the next morning, eyes red, suitcase small. She looked like a ghost of the sister who once laughed at her. For days, she barely spoke. Then one evening, Mira overheard her whispering on the phone. "Yes, Mother," she said. "I can fix this. If I can just get Leo to vouch for me, people will forget everything. He's the media darling now." Myra's heart broke, not out of shock, but familiarity. That night, she walked into Clara's room. "How long were you planning to pretend?" Clara froze. "I heard your call," Mira said softly. "You told Mom you'd use us." Clara's lips trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and for the first time, she cried, not the polished tears of pride, but the raw sobs of someone who had lost herself. Mira knelt beside her. "You can start over," she said quietly. "But this time, do it for real, not for headlines." Months later, the Preston empire began to collapse. Scandals surfaced, deals unraveled, donations vanished. Eleanor lost her charity seat. Charles sold their mansion to cover debts. Clara, now humbled, began working with Mira at their new foundation, the Robert Hart Initiative, named after Myra's uncle who walked her down the aisle. They provided scholarships for young engineers and trade apprentices. Life came full circle. Years later, at their daughter's second birthday, Mira saw her parents standing quietly at the gate. William held a book. Eleanor carried a toy. "We don't expect anything," he said softly. "We just wanted to be here." Mira studied them for a long time. She wasn't angry anymore. "Thank you," she said simply. Then she turned to Leo, watching their daughter laugh beneath the sun. "This," she whispered, "is our legacy." And for the first time, peace didn't feel like an ending, it felt like home. Please like, comment, and subscribe.